Okay, so this is problem number 3 from the quiz. So take a minute and go ahead and try to solve that, keeping in mind the steps that we listed out from problem number 2. So the first one was put it all in terms of sine and cosine. So you can pause the video or you can just wait because I am going to write it out down here. So the first thing that I'm going to do is put it in terms of sine and cosine. So that means that I am going to change this term. Everything else is in terms of sine and cosine. All right. So okay, so this is a big mess, in my opinion. The biggest mess being that we have a fraction on the denominator over here. So let's think about this. So there are a couple of things that we can do. I'm looking at, we have this 1 minus sine over cosine. So I think what I want to do is go ahead and the problem also is that we have 2 different fractions, right? So first I want to get this fraction out of the denominator. I'm sorry, not 2 different fractions, 2 different denominators. So what I think I would prefer is let's move this whole term over here. And then let's deal with this denominator. So I just clicked on something. All right, so, whoops, what's going on? Oh, I'm setting up an XY plane. Okay. All right, so what I want to do is subtract. Let's subtract this term right here. Okay, so I am going to end up with cosine x over 1 minus sine x over cosine x. And now I'm going to subtract it. So, whoops, somehow my x got undone. All right, so equals cosine x minus sine x cosine x over sine x minus cosine x. All right. Now, what I want to do is scroll up a little bit. What I want to do is get this term in the bottom. I don't like the 1 minus, right? So I want it all to be over cosine x. So let's get a common denominator just for the bottom. So we just want a common denominator right here. So what I'm going to do here is rewrite the whole thing, but I'm going to start with the denominator. So I'm going to change my 1 to cosine over cosine. So I'm not going to write that to save time, but I'm going to write the denominator is now going to be cosine x, and the top, because the 1 is cosine over cosine, is cosine x minus sine x. Now I'm going to rewrite this one, which was and is cosine x, and that equals still this whole right-hand side. All right. So here's something that we can do. A lot of times they'll write left-hand side and right-hand side, and they'll solve them separately. And that's what we're going to do now, because when you're taking your quiz or your test, time is super important. So let's just write that this equals, we'll put it all in blue so we're clear. This equals the left-hand side. Left-hand side. All right, so now what I want to do is, I'm actually going to undo that just to make my life easier. But now you can see, okay, we're just doing the left-hand side right now. In fact, we'll put it in blue over here so we're clear what we're working with. All right, so now what I want to do is rewrite this, because when I am about to flip a fraction, this just makes more sense to me. So cosine x over 1 over cosine x minus sine x over cosine x. All right, so now what I'm going to do is multiply it by cosine x over cosine x minus sine x. All right, so I figured out there. All right, so I'm going to just continue to multiply. So cosine x over cosine x minus sine x. All right, so this allows this whole thing to cross out. Let's change it to red. So this cancels out with this cancels out with this. So now I am left with, whoops, let's do that. So the top terms multiplied is cosine squared x over cosine x minus sine x. So again, I'm going to put that in blue because that's my left-hand side. I know it seems like I have a lot of colors because it's on the screen, but one thing I learned in college is you go buy those, like a 10-pack of the Sharpie fine points with all the different colors, and they are your best friends for doing math or engineering problems or anything like that, because they help you keep track of stuff. All right, let's do the right-hand side now. So let's put that in lightning yellow color. So the right-hand side is right here. All right. So that's going to be, let's go ahead and just, I'm going to rewrite it here for you. So cosine x minus sine x cosine x over sine x minus cosine x. All right, so I'm going to have to get a common denominator here, or I noticed something with my right and left hand side, which is, okay, bear with me on this. So here's my left hand side, and this is the term, cosine minus sine, cosine x minus sine x. There's my x. All right, and then here is sine x minus cosine x. So if I multiply these things out, then I actually get negative sine x squared minus cosine x squared, which would be -1. So I just want to keep that in mind. So basically what I want to do is get, let's go back to our right-hand side now. I'm like, okay, I'm thinking, all right, I like that denominator because that's going to give me a -1. That's nice and simple. So I want to get my cosine x over sine x minus cosine x. All right. So the way to do that is to multiply the entire term by sine x minus cosine x. Oh, that's not true. Let's erase that. Sorry. Don't multiply the entire term. Just multiply the cosine term. All right, so we have to rewrite it, because if you do that, then you end up messing with this denominator, and you don't want to do that. So I'm going to rewrite it in a different order. Negative sine x cosine x over sine x minus cosine x. See, I just make mistakes because it makes it easier to see that you can make mistakes and still get the right answer. All right, so let's call this cosine x over 1 times sine x minus cosine x over sine x minus cosine x. All right, so again, we're just going to recopy this part. Let's scroll up. Uh-oh, we're running out. All right, so let's rewrite this. So you're going to get negative, I'm just copying here, negative sine x cosine x over sine x minus cosine x equals, now I'm going to distribute cosine x sine x minus cosine x squared over sine x minus cosine x. Okay, and then I realize now I made another little error, which is right there. I wrote equals instead of plus. Okay, so now what I can do is combine my top terms. So I have a sine times cosine right here, and then I have a negative sine times cosine. So that just becomes 0. So do you see this? Negative sine x cosine x times, we can call this sine x cosine x because they are, they can just be interchanged because that's multiplication. And so then we end up with simply negative cosine squared x over sine x minus cosine x. All right, so that's my right-hand side. So I'm going to put it in lightning yellow because, all right, so this is my right-hand side, this is my left-hand side, and we want to show that they are equal. So let me try to pull up another piece of paper. All right, so there are a couple of ways to do this, but one thing that we did talk about just a second ago was that if you multiplied this denominator times this denominator, you would actually end up with 1. But we're not going to do that because there's an even simpler solution. This is cosine squared x, this is negative cosine squared x. Let's just multiply this whole thing times negative 1 over negative 1. And you end up with, let's rewrite the left-hand side, cosine squared x over cosine x minus sine x equals cosine squared x over negative sine x plus cosine x, which let's go ahead and rewrite it just to make it really beautiful. That's cosine x minus sine x, and we're going to change the order, and we end up with cosine x minus sine x. All right, so you showed that they were equivalent. Yay! All right, so we have to stop and think about our steps. So stop right now, pause the video, go back and look through what your steps were. Okay, so we're going to list the steps that I did. They might be different from yours. The first thing that we did was we got everything in terms of sine and cosine. So I'm going to actually change the color. Let's do it in blue. All right, so 1 sine cosine. All right, and then honestly, I was like, oh, this is a mess. I don't want to deal with it. So then I had to deal with some emotional issues of not wanting to deal with this problem. Then I just said, all right, I can't find any other way around it. I have to deal with the fraction that is in the denominator. So it took some moving stuff around, so I'm just going to say deal with because we know that there were some algebraic steps required. Deal with the fraction in the denominator. Another thing we should say is it's totally okay to break it up into left-hand side and right-hand side. In fact, I think that breaking things up that way makes people look like a very fancy mathematician. Because if you want a career in math, then you will be breaking things up like that as long as it lasts. All right, so then once we broke it up left-hand side and right-hand side, then we really just did some more algebra. And it seems like all of these problems have some algebra at the end. All right, so we got it. Yay. I hope that made sense to you, and leave a comment if it didn't. All right.